You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. This week I welcome author T.J. Green to the show to discuss her phenomenal career over the last decade. With a devoted fan base and a burgeoning collection of titles under her belt, TJ's stories featuring magic, myth and witchcraft continue to push the boundaries. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mystriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. You can also click the link in the show notes as usual. Thank you to Danny, Dave and Christina, my latest patrons. Welcome to the team, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support the show with your contributions. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for episodes and news. The Mysteries and Monsters exclusive merchandise store is available via TeePublic, and you can find the link to that in the show notes as usual. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. So, let's join T.J. Green and enter her realm of urban fantasy. A childhood obsession with creative writing finally came to fruition once my latest guest relocated to the beautiful islands of New Zealand. This new location saw the creative shackles removed, and since then author T.J. Green has built a devoted fan base in the urban fantasy genre. Tracy, welcome to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Your book series shows a real sort of love of strong female characters, a real interest and knowledge in the realms of witchcraft, and you've built up a phenomenal readership that seem to be very supportive and positive and embracing some of your wonderful characters and series that you've created. For somebody like yourself, Tracy, very similar to me, I'm one of those people that I was very creative and interested in all kinds of things as a younger person, and then, as with many of us, life gets in the way. When you look back, are you kind of surprised how quickly your dream has come to fruition? Some people might say, sometimes people will say that they're an overnight sensation. A friend of mine is in a band that got very famous in the 90s, and people were saying, oh, where you've come from? And he said, well, we were an overnight success that took 13 years.
Yes, of course. It's never as quick as people think, is it?
No.
They don't see all the hard work that goes in behind it. No.
I mean, when those kinds of situations occur then, when you look at it now, I mean, I've seen you speak with other authors and appear on other shows. It seems that you had a real sort of drive once you moved to New Zealand. You thought, well, I've always had this love and dream of becoming an author. Do you think it was just a new surrounding, new starts? You just thought, right, I'm here now. I've got no more excuses, as we all do, many of us, when we try to write our first book. The first is always the hardest. And it was just that when you got there, you went, brilliant, here we go.
I did. That was exactly, actually, as you say, I've kind of loved writing since I've been little, you know, when I'm small, and when I went to school, I loved doing writing in English classes. And then I toyed with it in my 20s, and I've always kept diaries, you know, so like a typical writer, I've always written in one form or another. But yes, it was definitely my intent that I really push ahead with it. And New Zealand, moving to New Zealand from the UK, gave me the mental and physical, I think, kind of time and space in which to do it. So it was a driving factor behind me getting residency, so I could apply to do my degree in English literature. So I could start doing that at Massey University, which is kind of in Wellington, and there's another branch in New Zealand. But then it was also with that intention that, yes, I'll get my writing going. So I did quite a few creative writing papers as part of that. So, yeah, it was very deliberate on my behalf once I was there. It wasn't my reason for moving to New Zealand, but once I was there, it felt like it was the right time to pursue it.
Had you always wanted to write in this particular genre, Tracy, or was this something that, as you've developed your love and interest in witchcraft, it seems as though it's always been in your life, whether you've embraced it or not? It's been coming for you, whether you wanted to accept it or not. It seems when I've read some of your life stories and experiences that you've had, it's almost as if the magical world was waiting for you to finally realise it was ready for you.
Yeah, you're right, actually. You just feel like it's been coming for me, which is a really weird way of thinking of it. But actually, yes, no, you're right. It's, I talked about it in, obviously, the blog you mentioned, Leaning Into My Witch. It was, I've always been interested in witchcraft and the paranormal, and I've always been very intuitive and embraced paganism from kind of 18, 19 years of age, really. And I've always questioned religion and our kind of place in the world and how it all works. So it was very natural for me when I started writing that I would be writing the paranormal, because I've always been interested in myths and legends and folklore as well. And although I'm a massive fan of detective fiction, actually, it's one of the biggest genres I enjoy reading, it wasn't where I gravitated to when I started writing. And obviously I started writing Rise of the King, which is more Arthurian fantasy. And there's a lot of witchcraft in there, obviously, you know, with those wonderful Arthurian witches.
Yes.
So it was a very natural step for me to kind of be writing about witches then in my next series.
I'm intrigued by a couple of your experiences in your younger life, as it is for many of us.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, as I was sort of pulling your leg about you avoiding it until it caught up with you, as it were. There's a really interesting story you mention about when you were sort of living with a group of other women, and you, fortunately, there was a fire in one of the bedrooms, and luckily nobody was hurt, but someone had to sort of share your room, and said that they couldn't settle in it because it felt like it was too full of you, which is a very interesting thing to say. And like you say, you kind of thought, well, is that my personality? But I think when you look back at that incident and that kind of turn of phrase, it's like I said earlier on, it's almost as if you've always had it there, whether you sort of embraced it or not. It always seemed to be surrounding you, as it were.
Yes, I think so. And you say it was an odd thing to say, and it stuck with me kind of all those years, you know, all these years later. And that my other flatmate agreed. And I thought, oh, and maybe it is like a kind of energy. I don't know. It's hard to know, isn't it, how other people kind of see you or feel you, I suppose. But yeah, it's a type of energy, maybe, that kind of filled the space. I don't know. But I've had other friends who she used to call me, what did she used to say? Something about, oh, but you're always so wise. Always so wise.
Yes.
And I thought, God. So maybe I think I'm very calm and I'm quite collected, and maybe I just give out this, I don't know, maybe there's a bit of an aura almost. I don't know. Aura sounds a bit dramatic, but yes, it's odd. And as you say, I've kind of always been very interested in that. And I've had friends around me who are also interested in that different kind of way of being, I suppose.
Yeah. I suppose as well, with the way that you grew up and the scenes that you gravitated towards, you know, as you say, you're very proud to say that you were a grunge girl in that particular period of time. And I think as I grew up and moved to Sheffield, it was quite obvious to me about the certain scenes that were there and there or thereabouts. And obviously as someone that was sort of an age where I was going to concerts and buying a lot of records and doing things at that time, I'm fully aware of all that sort of explosion at the end of the 80s into the early 90s and some of the incredible bands and music that came along, and also the scenes that it seemed to sort of fire up here in the UK as the 90s progressed.
Yeah, wonderful time, wasn't it?
Yes, certainly was. The bits I remember, Tracy, yes.
Yes, they were very hedonistic times. It was a lot of fun.
And it's interesting as well when you look at certain leaders of that particular scene and genre at that period, that there's always been very strong female characters. Certain rock bands and certain alternative bands always have very strong female characters. You've got people like Susie Sue and some of the incredible bands that came out of the punk scene and sort of developed into the goth and alternative scene in the 80s, and then obviously into the 90s, where you had some major rock bands with female lead singers. Obviously, probably the best example of that is Shirley Manson with Garbage. So,
I would say actually Courtney Love and Hole, which obviously I was a huge fan of, and L7, which were very much in the fringe kind of music scene as well.
Yes, absolutely. Two bands I've had the fortune of seeing both of them.
Yeah.
L7 was certainly the better live performer, I'll say that, but I think that was more to do with offstage refreshment.
Oh, fair enough. I must admit, I was a bigger fan of Hole, and I've seen them live a few times here on Reading Festival, and also Hampton they played, and I thought they were awesome. But a lot of big kind of female bands at the time who were doing really well, which was amazing. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's certainly something that seems to have continued into the modern era, and obviously these days there are probably far more opportunities these days for female fronted bands from those genres to get noticed and build really successful careers, which is always a good thing to see, because at the end of the day you should judge an artist and a band on the quality of the music and nothing else, I find.
Absolutely, yes, I agree.
So you've always kind of had this attraction to strong characters and scenes and things like that. I mean, one of the other interesting stories I saw was something that I've seen a couple of people that I've got to know over the years have had very similar things occur to them, Tracy, when they've gone for a palm reading or a tarot reading, or they've gone to see a psychic, where the person who's doing the sitting will say something along the words of, "I think you're on the wrong side of the table," which I think for many people, when you don't actively pursue those kinds of interests or try and develop any latent skills you may or may not have, I suppose that could be quite challenging, or some people might even suspect it could be frightening, because I suppose if you go in there expecting just, pulling cards out and just giving you the generic information, when somebody says something so specifically to you and you know that you've always kind of had a love of the weird, that could kind of take you back, I would imagine, Tracy, when it happened.
Yeah, it did take me back. And but at the time, around that time, I'd got a friend who was very much into tarot reading and kind of witchcraft and pagan beliefs, who had gifted me a set of tarot cards, and he started to teach me how to use them. So when I had this kind of opportunity to go for a tarot reading as well, it almost kind of confirmed that I was doing the right things. Nevertheless, though, it was kind of weird that somebody else should comment on it and see it and say that to me. But yeah, it was a great form of affirmation, I suppose is the right word.
I suppose, I mean, obviously with the books you write and the characters you've got, it's almost as if, I know we were joking about it chasing you down, but it's almost like it was predetermined for you, whether you wanted it or not, that it was always going to be there for you. It was just a case of you had to sort of get to a point in your life where you kind of accepted it. And do you think that moving and sort of releasing your creativity when you moved down under, that this sort of also created a freedom in you personally that allowed you to kind of embrace the weird and your interest in paganism and Wicca and witches far more than you ever thought so? Because I think for people of our sort of generation, it's very interesting to see how people have changed over 30 years, where it would always be whispered about witchcraft and things like that, and they would go to the certain alternative shops, or head shops as some certain places used to call them when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Obviously I know what that's all about now. And so do you think the books have also not only allowed you to create the career you always wanted, but allowed you to become the person you always were? You just needed that kind of catalyst to break free and, as one of your wonderful readers said, come out of the broom closet.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I think the very act of writing itself is a form of discovery. I don't know if you do a lot of writing at all, but I love writing because, for me, I'm a discovery writer as well. I'm what's called a pantster. I don't plot. I write by the seat of my pants. So I love the fact that you start writing and your thoughts evolve as you're writing. and they kind of coalesce and take shape, and your thoughts form as you write. And that's what I found with keeping diaries and that as well. So yes, writing fiction, writing books about witchcraft and stuff, I've always been interested in it. Definitely solidified, I think, certain thoughts that I had around it, and kind of opened the door personally, I think, for it to become, for the real me to step out, I suppose. Interesting way of putting it, but yes. I mean, there comes a point, isn't there, where you kind of, obviously people write about all sorts of things. It doesn't mean they're going to become a serial killer or anything, but
yes.
Because it's so deeply ingrained with who I am and what I believe, that yes, it was a very natural progression. As I said in my blog, it was like, well, this is who I am and what I've, believed. And certainly going back, it's almost going back 30 years, and the steps I made then. And then they kind of get lost, don't you? In your 20s and your 30s, you end up doing so many other things. And then sometimes you come back, you circle around as life kind of leads you on different paths. And it's like, oh, there it is again, kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about loving the weird and the strange and the Fortean and the supernatural. It's a constant thing. It's always there for you. And it was very similar to me. I've always loved these kind of things. But I also drifted away in my 20s and 30s and came back to it in my mid-40s. And fully embraced it at that point, and just basically went, I've always been weird. Now I'm going to be really weird, and you can like it or lump it, really.
Yes. Oh, well, good. So what turned you, just out of curiosity, what kind of brought you back to it? Was it just a gradual recentering?
Yeah, well, I'd had a lot of challenges, and I'd really struggled with my mental health sort of for about 10 years, seriously ill. And ended up hospitalising myself, shall we say. And it was one of those situations where some people could look back and think, oh, well, nothing's going to change. Whereas I kind of thought, yeah, I've got away with this. I'm very lucky. And within sort of 2 or 3 days of that, I thought, right, I'm drawing a line in my sand. It's basically, that's my old life and this is me going forwards. And from that point on, this is 6 years ago now, 6.5 years ago, I just went, right. This is what I always loved. This is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to try and do it. And it just basically, within a couple of weeks, I'd completely changed my focus of who I was and what I was and where I wanted to be. Almost as though I'd basically found myself. And, I certainly wouldn't recommend the path I took to finding yourself, shall we say. No. And obviously with your experience as someone that's worked in mental health, Tracy, I'm sure you're aware of what I'm alluding to. So in that kind of situation, it was that part of my personality, I think, by trying to hold it in and essentially putting on a performance or a facade of who I really was, I think was part of the reason I wasn't very well, because I wasn't being true to myself. I was trying to be something for other people that I just wasn't comfortable wearing that skin, if that makes sense.
I know, absolutely, because as you say, you're not being your authentic self, are you? You're hiding it, and it is unhealthy. You say it's like some people like yourself have it's quite a traumatic path, I guess, that you went down. And for others, fortunately, like myself, it was never like that. But yes, it's something that you bury and that will find a way of coming back out, and that you then should embrace, because that's who you are. And I'm glad you're much better now. That's really good to hear.
It is. Well, as everything, as with anybody in these kind of situations, it's I'm always in recovery, and I'm it's never too far away. But I'm far better prepared to deal with the challenges, and I'm certainly a lot more resolute and determined these days. So it's been life affirming on a variety of fronts, and as I've said and I've joked previously on other shows, Bigfoot saved my life, Tracy. So it is what it is.
Say that. I was going to say that's cool. Not many people can say that. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. For you as well, one of the key aspects of the series that you've created and the places that you set them is that, as we were saying, it's very clear that while sometimes when people write in certain fantasy sections and decide that they want to create books in that particular field, I was quite struck by the fact that you wanted your witches to have a more realistic, grounded approach to it. And like we were saying about how the books have freed you both career-wise and personally, do you think that also acted as a catalyst for you to embrace your witchy side and sort of learn more, maybe at first to sort of give your characters a bit more flesh on their bones and a bit more reality to what you were writing about, but it ended up that actually you were essentially doing what you wanted your characters to do, and therefore you got your hands dirty to learn what you were going to write them at?
Yeah, I think so. It was a way of legitimizing, I guess, my interest in research a little bit more. It's like, oh yeah, I'm doing it for the research for the books. Or it was something 100% that I was so interested in anyway. I mean, I did a paper, I studied a paper on witchcraft and magic, which wasn't an English literature paper. It was like one of the, another discipline as part of my English literature paper. But I loved it. It was absolutely fascinating. So that reignited my interest. So that put me firmly back kind of on that path. And then when I started writing my series, the White Omen Witches series, it was a very deliberate move that I kept the witches very grounded because, I knew about Wiccans and people who celebrate and practice witchcraft, but who are not Wiccans, because obviously that's a couple of different things.
Mm-hmm.
But, who are people who are just like anybody else, and they go about their daily business and their work, and it's just a part of who they are, as well as being, wives, husbands, girlfriends, boyfriends, mothers, fathers, what have you. So it was very deliberate, yes, that I kept my witches grounded and in the real world and very believable that they have their own businesses. And it wasn't some weirdly wonderful, magical hocus pocus that lived off in Never Neverland. I wanted that realness. And I think that's why it resonated really well right from the start with my readers, because they found something that really spoke to them and that echoed their beliefs and the way they lived.
I was going to say it's quite clear that the characters and the way they carry themselves in the books that you've released has clearly resonated with a lot of people, because I think when authors dive into a specific field, sometimes they can be quite surprised how quickly things catch fire. But one of the interesting things about yourself is it seemed quite a slow burn, Tracy, and then it seems to have gone from 0 to 60 very quickly for you, due to you kind of focused on what you wanted to do and how you wanted to do it, and sort of that really seems to have just blown up incredibly. Because I mean, I look at your reviews on Amazon, and you've got 4.5, 5-star reviews in the thousands on large numbers of your publications already, which speaks volumes, Tracy, I think, for the devoted fan base you've built up, the way that they respect you as both an author and a person, and the fact that they have clearly really invested in you and the characters and the books and the stories that you brought them over the years. Does it still sort of blow you away sometimes when you sit down on a beautiful evening in the Algarve and think sometimes, I can't believe this is happening sometimes?
Yes, yeah, it is actually, and I do feel really lucky to have such a lovely group of readers and some real super fans, some wonderful, wonderful fans. And as you said, they found me, some with Rise of the King, which was not called Rise of the King at the time. It was Tom's Arthurian Legacy. That was my Arthurian young adult book. But they found me there, and then they followed me to the White Omen Witches. But the White Omen Witches series definitely was where I found a lot of my readers. And yeah, they really took the series to heart, and I knew very early that it was going to do reasonably well. I had no idea I would be writing book 13 sort of all these years later. But yeah, I mean the reviews kept growing, and the reviews was really positive, and my pre-orders kept growing, and it just kind of snowballed. And for the first 6 books, that's all I did. I wrote one book after another. And as you say, I was very focused. In June of 2018, when my first series hadn't done so well, I doubled down basically on, I was in quite a few writers' forums, and I knew success was possible if I approached it the right way. So, I kind of doubled down, wrote quickly, got those first books out, and produced, basically was putting my books out every 3 to 4 months. And that's what I did. So I was working full time at the time, so there was a lot of writing on the evening, and I was finally able to drop down to 4 days a week. But yes, it's been great, and I've put other series out since, like the Whitehaven Hunters, which is a spin-off direct from the Witches, from characters that were developed in those series. And my readers have followed me there, and they followed me consequently onto other series, and they are wonderful. And you should say that my reviews have been amazing, amazingly high starred over a consistent period. It means I'm kind of, 80 to 85% kind of, 5-star reviews, which is like amazing, really amazing. So fingers crossed, long may that continue.
Do you often find that the stories that you're trying to write, end up taking you places you weren't expecting, Tracy? I mean, I've spoken to other authors, and I've become friends with authors across the world since I started doing this show. And a couple of them have often said it's almost as if the character's writing the book and I'm just channeling it, as though they're sort of receiving messages from the other side to them.
Yes, it does feel like that, actually. And I say, especially because I am a discovery writer. So I start off with a very basic idea of plot. And they're also very character driven. I've got this is going to happen, but I've got all these characters, and they have their own journeys to go on, and they grow hugely and have grown hugely across the series. So yes, they do take me on little journeys, and things happen that I didn't see coming even. And I'm like, oh, okay, but this is cool. I'm just going to follow it. So yes, it's odd where your subconscious takes you, and where your your characters take you. Fun. It's fun, because it never gets predictable. So that's always exciting.
Yeah. It often feels like your subconscious is leading you by the hand then.
Yes, very much so. And I've learned to trust, and I've said before, I am very intuitive. I don't often kind of second guess myself. If it feels right, I just do it. And so I let my gut lead and my intuition lead as far as the characters and the story goes. And I think that's why they are quite twisty as well sometimes. I don't like things to be too straightforward, either for me, my characters, or my readers. Yeah.
Keeping everybody on their toes.
Keep everyone on their toes, yeah.
I suppose when it comes to writing as well, are you one of those authors, Tracy, that has a designated kind of way of working? I know some people like to work a prescribed number of words per day. Some people like to work a prescribed number of hours. Some people like to write in the evening. Some people like to write in the day. Are you one of those people that you've got a regime, and if it comes off, it comes off, and if it doesn't, you're quite okay with that? You're not one of those people that can sit at the keyboard and nothing happens for 3 hours and you just go, oh, that's it, I've got writer's block.
No, I always work it through. So I have got a routine. So now obviously I'm a full-time writer. I have been since the end of 2020, which is marvellous. So I pretty much stick to a regular working day because that suits me. I get up, 7:30, 8ish, and I kind of filter through social media and check messages and that. And at my desk, I follow up on emails and odd things. I have my own shop now, and I just chase up anything on there. And then I aim to hit at least 2,000 words a day. But if I can do 2,500 to 3,000, then that's great. And usually by the end of a book, that second half, I am pretty much 2,500 to 3,000. If for some reason I don't know, it doesn't always happen, then I'm not going to beat myself up over it. These things happen. And some days are slower than others, and other days, the words just pour out. But on top of the writing, obviously, I keep up the social media posts. I have a newsletter I send out, and I run advertising. So there's all sorts, and it being an independent author, which is what I am, you're juggling lots of balls. There's lots of cogs in the author machine that you have to keep going. But yes, I'm pretty structured. So by about 5, my day's done and I'm just relaxing on an evening.
Perfect. Sounds idyllic.
So yeah, I do work on Sunday as well, but I don't write on a Sunday. So I put in a lot of hours, to be fair. But I enjoy it. It's my passion.
Well, if you can do something that you're passionate about and enjoy it, then it doesn't matter really. I think you're winning in whatever career path you set yourself to do, Tracy. Really.
Yeah, and I do feel very lucky. I'm probably going to set myself a little one less book to write. Perhaps I did 4 last year in a novella. I'm just going to do 4 this year. But I'm quite busy, like, I said, I've set up my own shop called Happenstance Books and Merch. So that takes time. So I might look at maybe doing 3 books next year, but I've not decided yet. But we'll see. So I do have a tendency to keep going, and try and do all the things all of the time. And it's not always good. So, yeah, I tried to take my foot off the brake a little bit, foot off the pedal, I should say, a little bit over the past few months. That was one of my New Year's resolutions, not to keep going, and just to enjoy the Algarve.
Yes, and so you should. There are it's an incredible place. Like I say, I've visited it several times. The last time I visited it purely to land there because we were staying somewhere in Spain, Tracy, and the nearest airport was Faro.
Was it?
And we ended up having to get a taxi from Portugal to Spain, which is something I never thought I'd do.
A taxi?
Yeah, because the nearest airport to where we were staying in Spain was 3 hours away, and Faro was an hour and 10 minutes. So we landed in Portugal and got taken to Spain in the world's fastest taxi. One of my friends didn't open his eyes for an hour. And he's a professional driver. He was terrified.
Yeah, it sounds really terrifying. So what have you seen of the Algarve?
I've most of the time I've been sort of around Albufeira and places like that. I've visited further up. I've been to Lisbon. I adore Portugal and the Portuguese. I love the food. I love the weather. I love the culture. It's the kind of place that I've always said if I was fortunate enough to find a career path or was very fortunate enough to win a large amount of money, I would move to Portugal primarily because it's in the same time zone and I also happen to love it.
Yeah, being in the same time zone as the UK actually is really handy. And as you say, the weather down here is just fantastic.
Yeah, I know a friend of mine and his wife had moved out there, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. They lost their parents and so they had an inheritance and whatever, and so they just sold up and went right, and they opened up a glamping site up in northern Portugal, and they absolutely love it. And it's, as you're saying about when you moved to New Zealand, it's quite interesting because both of those, he started diving into his poetry. He's always been quite artistically inclined, Tracy. He's been in bands and been a writer and things, but he's had to sort of do the daily grind in life, and so has his wife. But then as they've moved, he's sort of opened himself up fully to embrace his poetry side, and she's really sort of developed her artistic side and recently had her first show. So I think often when you take a chance on chasing a dream, sometimes you get more than you expected, I think.
Yes, and it's about creating space, I think, in your life, isn't it, for other things. And unfortunately, very often we can't always do that because we have to work and we have to make money. But it really is important to make time for the things you enjoy, or at least create space to experiment with what you think you might enjoy, because it's not healthy not to. And as you say, some great things can come out of it. I think that was COVID was a terrible, terrible, awful time. But I think the good thing that came out of COVID is that people had a chance to sit back and reevaluate how they were living and what they were doing. And think about, is there another way to be doing this? And out of all the awfulness of COVID, I think that was very positive to come out of it for some people.
I think for a lot of us, we've all come out of that with a far better life-work balance that we had. I know many of my colleagues have a wry smile on their face, because the amount of times we were told before the pandemic that working from home was impossible and we just didn't have the tech to do it, to then discover within a week of lockdown starting we'd all suddenly got laptops and told to go home. We're like,
do it now.
Yeah.
You have to work from home. Yeah.
So we were all like, okay. So we've always been able to do this. They just couldn't be bothered.
And that was quite freeing in some ways, wasn't it?
Very much so, I think. And it, like you say, I think it kind of allowed us to focus more on the self and the actual four walls, because we had no outside, well, we couldn't go anywhere other than for a walk or anything. And I think some people discovered TV, some people creative sides sort of bloomed, other people, obviously there were some people that found the isolation quite challenging. But I think for some people, it really opened up the possibilities of taking the focus away from that daily grind and coming back to themselves and realizing these are the things I enjoy. These are my passions. This is what makes me happy. And I think when we've all been through something like that, I think when you come out of it the other side, the one thing I think myself and a lot of my friends and family have found is that they've realized what really matters after that kind of situation. And I think it does put the focus on sort of, as you said earlier on, about centering yourself and finding who you are. And then I think most of us, after all that happened, have come out of it probably different people than we were when we started it.
Yes, I think so. What's been interesting since we've moved here as well, my partner is a really good artist, actually. And he used to dabble at it back in New Zealand, but since we've come out here, he doesn't work anymore. I'm able to support both of us, fortunately, through my writing. And he's fantastic. He supports me. So he does everything, around the house. He cooks so much, which supports me to write full time. But it means he's also now able to indulge in his passion of painting more. And hopefully, like your friend who's in the north, I'm really hoping he'll be able to have a show at some point, or have a gallery opening, or find somewhere to display his art, because he's so good. So, he's coming back to what he used to do years and years ago before he got kind of stuck in that work cycle.
Well, why not? I mean, one of my friends, a gentleman here in Sheffield called Peter McKee, has become probably Sheffield's premier artist over the last 20 years, and I remember giving him his first exhibition when I used to be a pub landlord. And these days, he's doing collaborations with Paul Smith, and he's got giant murals everywhere, and he's done album covers for incredible bands, and he's become sort of the artistic face of Sheffield now. And so it's incredible. And he was somebody who worked for the council, and he did it in his spare time, and he just caught fire. The images he created, the stories he was telling with his art, it really struck a chord with a lot of people. And he's gone from just being your normal working class lad with a council job to being one of Britain's most sought after modern artists.
That's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, it just shows what you can do when you have the time to indulge your passions.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're fortunate enough that other people appreciate you enough, it allows you to then sort of explode into the person your talents can take you to be.
And that's one of the things, actually, that we talk about a lot in writing. It's not only that you need to write a good book, but you need to write a good book in a subject, a genre that actually there's a big readership for. Because you can write amazing books, but if no one wants to read them, then you're never going to sell them. So it's about finding that sweet spot between something you really love and a genre that you kind of know reasonably well or very well, and that you hit those genres and there's an audience for it. And I think, fortunately for me, back in 2018, and so when I decided to pursue my Whitehaven Witches series, there was already a big market for witch fiction and a huge interest in witchcraft. And that has just grown anyway over the last few years. That is now so huge. People are so interested in, we supported the petition on my Facebook page for the petition to get an apology for the persecution of witches.
Yes.
And that is now, so all of that is now so much more in the public eye, and witchcraft, as we've said, as opposed to 30 years ago when it wasn't really talked about much. It's now everywhere. There's witch talk, and there's loads of witchcraft on Instagram and on Pinterest, and it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, it is. I mean, my partner's a practicing Wiccan. We've got friends who have become Wiccans. We go to the local Wicca shop quite a lot. It is remarkable. I found myself sort of gravitating from being, I would consider myself an atheist, to more sort of, I would suggest that I've now become more of a kind of believer of animism. And I find a lot of things that chime with my beliefs about the world and my place in it and the creatures in it is very akin to pagan beliefs. And that's probably what I really am. My grandmother, God rest her soul, would not be surprised, because obviously she considered herself to be a white witch all those years ago. And so some people would say that I'm simply carrying on the family tradition, just in a slightly different way.
Oh, well, how lovely is that?
Yes. Yeah. But it's quite surprising when I look back at being a child and all these people would come to her for readings. I just thought she was a very popular old lady. Now I know why. Because she was very good, apparently.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I suppose as well, as you say, you're a self-published author. You are essentially, I mean, I find this quite incredible when you look at the way you work and you would say your little empire that you've built up now, Tracy, that you seem to be able to deal with everything, but you've also got a really kind of focused approach to even how your book covers are, the fact that you've got most of your work now as audiobooks. You seem to have a real synergy in the way that your books look. When I look at one of your covers, even if your name's not on it, I can tell it's a book in your series, because they're a very distinctive style. When you have to try and cross-pollinate your ideas across your art, your releases, searching down the narrators for your audio books, your mailing lists, your advertising sort of focus as well, I think a lot of people would be quite surprised that you're happy to sort of drive that, because for some people that might seem like a many-headed hydra that is hard to control.
Yes, it's certainly not for everyone, but I really love that control, and I think a lot of independent authors do. This is why we go down the indie author route, as opposed to, well, I mean, traditionally published is obviously when a publishing house signs you on and does a lot of that for you, although they obviously expect that you do have a big social media presence now. And obviously not everybody gets to have a traditional publisher because they are very picky about who they pick up. Fortunately, we don't have to worry about that now. I really like being an independent publisher. I like being able to choose my cover designer, and I use the same one that I've used right from the beginning since I started my Arthurian series. So I love working with her. But yes, I decide what my covers look like in collaboration with her. She's amazing. I certainly don't design my own covers. That would be a disaster. And then I searched out my own narrators, and that's really hard actually to pick a good narrator. But I happen to have got a great one, Diana Craft, who now does all of my audiobooks, apart from my Arthurian fantasy series, and I use a guy called Adam Gold, who's also amazing. So I feel very lucky that I've got those. And yes, you deal with all of that. Sourcing, I decide when I want to release my books. I decide my own release dates. I work with my designer. I have my own editor. But that's the same for any indie author. We develop those connections, and they're the people we work with. And you have to have very clear, you have to be clear within when you want things done by. So, I can't rush my cover designer and say I need a book in three weeks, So we have to plan things out and give them time and give my editor time and my narrator time. So you are running, a little business, a big business in some respects.
Yes, yeah. I mean, like you say, it's not for everyone, but I think if you've got the time and the drive to do it, it's clearly very rewarding, because essentially you are keeping total control of your intellectual property. You know what you want it to sound like, you know what you want it to look like, you know what you want it to read like, Tracy. And I think sometimes when you give up parts of that, you kind of make do, I think, sometimes with decisions that are made on your behalf. And I know I've spoken to people in the past that they've not been happy about certain aspects of either their advertising or the narration that's sometimes used, or they think that the person doesn't understand the book, if that makes sense. And therefore, I think when you can drop on with someone and have that relationship where you think they are a perfect fit, everything just falls into place, I suppose.
It does. And as you say, as I said earlier, it's like these cogs in a machine, and they all need to be kind of working together. Otherwise, it becomes nightmarish. So I'm very touching wood right now, and I'm thinking, yes, long may that continue. Because, yes, you need to keep it all rolling. And I'm very, as you said about my covers, I know how they want them to look. Very pleased. My cover designer's done a great job. And it is important because indie authors are competing not just with each other, although to say we're competing, a lot of us work together and support each other. It's a wonderful community. But, we have to compete with traditional books, traditionally published. So you have to work to a high quality, and you have to have great looking covers, and you have to have well edited books. Otherwise, you do look kind of messy and unprofessional. And none of us want to look like that. I certainly don't. So you have to have very high standards and work to time frames and keep the business rolling along.
I know you mentioned it earlier on that you're a big lover of detective fiction and that particular genre, but you're also a massive Trekkie. And I suppose, as you were saying about writing about what you love, some people would be very surprised that you haven't dove into those kind of things. But I think, as you've been explaining, sometimes it's harder to write about the things you enjoy to relax than perhaps it is to write about the things that you enjoy as a career path and the stories you want to tell. And therefore, were you ever tempted to dabble in science fiction, or were you thought, no, this is my entertainment thing, I don't want this to be my job?
Yeah, exactly. And it's weird, because I do, as you say, I'm a massive Star Trek fan. I just adore the films and I love the series. And I love other sci-fi films, Predator,
yes,
Alien, huge fan of those.
Yes.
But I don't read science fiction, which is just a bit weird. I just don't read it, I never have, but I love watching it. So certainly it has never entered my head to write science fiction. And yes, detective fiction, I just love it. It's, I really enjoy reading it. But again, never kind of thought to write it. Toyed with it a bit, not saying it might not be something I delve into, but I more enjoy reading it, I think, than I would writing it. But I do write a lot of mysteries. So I love mysteries. So the mysteries are in my paranormal books.
Yeah.
So, and I do have my paranormal detectives. And so it's my version of, I guess, detective mysteries.
You're not getting to a point as Conan Doyle did with Sherlock Holmes, where he was so sick of him being famous, and it's almost as if Sherlock Holmes had become the real person, and Conan Doyle pushed the shadows. And I think when I've read his writings about that particular period of his time, obviously it was a very strange period of his time because he was obviously battling with his full involvement in the burdening spiritualist movement after the First World War, primarily due to the tragic loss of his son to the conflict and some of the losses that he'd also suffered. It's quite surprising for some people when they think, or they can't sort of comprehend how an author can get to a point where they seem to dislike the person that's made them who they are.
Yeah, I suppose it does seem a bit strange, doesn't it? I can't ever imagine wanting to kill off any of my characters. My readers before I start. And why would I do that? Because they're so popular and I love them. But maybe, I don't know what else was going on. I'd say he'd got a lot going on at the time. And I write more than just the Whitehaven Witches as well. I have lots of other characters. I've got 5 series in total at the moment. So I've got lots to divert me from my Whitehaven Witch characters if I think, I want to write something else.
Yes.
So no, not going to be.
Good. I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear that. I know you mentioned there that you love Predator. Have you seen Prey, which was the last Predator film that was mysteriously dropped on Hulu and then Disney Plus in Europe?
I think I did see it. Was that the one that was set kind of like 1,000 years ago or something like that? That one?
No, it's the Native American one. It's set in, is it 1726 or something?
Yes, that's one. Yeah. Yes, I have seen it. I was thinking it was such a while ago. When was it? Yes, I quite enjoyed it actually. I thought it was quite good.
I absolutely blew me away. I absolutely love it. It's my second favourite Predator film because I adore the original. But Prey, I just thought was such a good film, and it was so interesting seeing that kind of technological gap that you were thinking, well, how are these people going to do it? And then obviously it's because they know nature, and that's how they're able to beat it, because they understand how nature works and use it to their advantage. Yeah,
it was really clever actually. We really enjoyed it because you say the other few they've done in the Predators franchise haven't been as good, anywhere near as good as the first, but I did think Prey was very good. Yeah, very cleverly done.
I suppose one of the difficulties, as you touched on there, you've got 5 different series. Some people would find that an incredible body of work to try and keep on top of. Tracy, do you have sort of files for each series, and try and keep them as separate as possible, or do you think it's inevitable that they'll leak into each other, and so you don't want your series to be sort of strangers to each other, as it were, without sort of interfering with the plots and characters of each separate series?
Yeah, they do. They definitely do bleed into each other. It's what I call, and I guess my readers call, my Whitehaven world now.
Yes.
They're all connected. So, but I do try to keep them reasonably distinct. So, but Whitehaven Witches and Whitehaven Hunters definitely overlapped. When I completed book 6 of the Whitehaven Witches, that's when I started the Hunters series. And then from then on, it was kind of book 6 in the Witches, book 1 in the Hunters, book 7 Witches, book 2 Hunters. And that went on up until kind of, really the end. I did the last Hunters book this year, and that was book 7. And I've decided that is the end of that series. But it won't be the end of the characters. Some of them might get their own book spin-off. But those characters and the Whitehaven Witches intertwine. So some of them pop into the Hunters definitely pop into the Witches. And then out of book 3 of the Whitehaven Hunters series called Dark Star, that's when my Storm Moon Shifters popped up. So they were a group of shifters that the characters met in book 3. They've now got their own series. And it was out of the Storm Moon Shifters that my Moonfell Witches, which is the book that is being released this week, actually, from my own store. Those witches came out of the Storm Moon Shifters because I wrote the first book of the Storm Moon Shifters, and that's called Storm Moon Rising. And I thought, I need witches. I need some witches in London that my shifters can call on. And I thought, I can't write a book without witches. It's all wrong. So that's where my Moonfell Witches came in, and they live in this gloriously large Gothic mansion on the edge of Richmond Park. And they were great characters. I knew right from the start. Then I thought, yes, these are going to have their own series as well. So they are all interconnected, and there's characters from the Hunters that pop up in the Shifters. So it is a bit of a juggle to keep storylines distinct and separate, but the characters are very distinct. But it is nice to have them popping into each other's stories. And my readers love it as well, so they really like the fact that, I've got a character called Harlan, and a very sweary detective inspector called Maggie Milne, who was in my Hunter series, and now they're both in the Storm Moon Shifter series. So it's great. Pop up.
Yeah. Do you find it easier to write about places that you know of? And if so, do you deliberately keep it to your own personal experiences, Tracy, or are you a writer that visits locations and thinks this would be a great setting for a book? Or is it, as someone that's travelled quite well and has a love to find and discover new places, is it something that you use as a reason to visit places, or is it you're thinking, well, I loved being there, and like you just mentioned about Richmond Park, most people, if they set something in London, probably wouldn't pick Richmond for a start?
No, maybe not. Yeah, I guess it's a mix of places I know or places I've been to. And for others, it's like places that I think, that just sounds, it's a really cool place that I want to sit it. But for some places, I've not necessarily been there. I mean, Cornwall, I know really well. I had lots of great holidays in Cornwall when I was younger, and I've been back since I was there. Oh, blimey, was it last year or the year before? I'm losing track now. But so Cornwall I know really well. That was an absolute given for me, really, to set the Whitehaven Witches there, because Cornwall's packed with myths and legends and folklore, and it's such a fabulous place. And I think recently they've done a poll, and it is the biggest pagan population is centred in Cornwall, across England. So, but yeah, I've obviously been to London a few times, so I know London reasonably well. Not massively well, but reasonably well. So when I've been there, I have gone to places sometimes that I think, oh, I know it's going to pop up in my books, like the British Museum, which is a fabulous place.
Yes.
And yeah, Istanbul, I've been, so that cropped up in the Last Hunter's book, and I've travelled across Italy and France. So yeah, it's a mix of both. Places I've been to and I'm familiar with, and other places that I've researched because I just think, no, I want to do that there. And it's a mix of the facts and fiction that I kind of like to mix together.
Is it tempting to pull real life legends of witchcraft into your work, Tracy, or is it something that you deliberately try to keep at arm's length? Because I know some authors, when they write fiction, they will try and sort of attach it to certain historical incidents or certain historical characters. Or are you quite sort of happy to let your world exist alongside what we would consider our world, and therefore it's obvious that the real history will be part of the overriding arcs of your characters and your stories because it's set in the real world, they're just magical people?
Yes, that's exactly it. So I do touch on real people, like right at the start of Whitehaven Witches, obviously I refer to the Witchfinder General, who in reality never made it down to Cornwall. And I put that at the end of the book, that is the fictional part. But he, as a person, actually existed and drove the witch trials, obviously, in England, a particularly horrific time.
Yes.
I refer to them again, actually, Moonfell Witches, which is the book that Swika states called Triple Moon, Honey, Gold and Wild. And I talk about the witch trials then. And that series is actually, whereas the Whitehaven Witches is set, and all my other series actually are set very firmly in the present. The Moonfell Witches, I decided my readers, I polled my readers, I said, look, in this new series, do you want it set in the present, or maybe do you want a little bit of a mix of past and present? And I floated a few other options. And basically they were quite interested in past and present. So I talk about the modern witches in the contemporary world, and they flash back between, because they've lived in this Gothic mansion called Moonfell for over 500 years. So then I go back to the different witches in the different time periods. So in this particular one, they're going back to 1664. So it is, just after the witch trials really have ended and Charles II's on the throne. So I do refer to them again then. And I talk about Nell Gwyn. So I do weave in, yes, these real characters, and and you can't ignore the witch trials, can you?
No, absolutely. I hope Mr. Hopkin came to a sticky end.
Oh, we did. He died from TB.
Yes.
Not in my book, but in real life. He died from TB, didn't he?
Yes. Sadly, probably about 10 years too late for hundreds of people, but there we have it. I suppose you can't prescribe it going backwards for him, but yes, it was very strange that he did everything he did, and then very quickly he passed away. But I suppose that was the period. It's a very strange and odd time in British history, especially here. And I suppose it's one of those things that, as you mentioned earlier on about getting the pardons for things, I think some people say, oh, well, what's the point? It's 400 or 500 years ago. But I think it's morally right to try and challenge these massive miscarriages of justice that are still on the statute book, because it's ridiculous, and it's not just England. You've got certain trials that occurred in Wales and Scotland as well.
A lot in Scotland, actually, as well.
I visited Edinburgh last year, and I've spoke to a couple of researchers and authors up there, and obviously I'm very aware of some of the things that went on there. Obviously the most infamous trial there was obviously the Wizard of Bow Street in Edinburgh, which is a hell of a story if you ever get the time to read it, and find out just how strange that man really was, because that's one hell of a ride.
Do you know, I'm not familiar with that one. I'm going to have to look that up.
Oh, well, I'll not spoil it for you. All I'll say is he was he gave the impression of being a deeply, deeply religious man, and it all went very wrong for him towards the end of his life. And yeah, I would, if you fancy a bit of historical, it's the kind of story, Tracy, you'll look at and you'll go, oh my God, because there's things in that even shocked me, and I like to think I've got quite a a tough nature when it comes to reading about all kinds of aspects, be it history or fiction. But I have to say, even that made me take a sharp intake of breath, along with what he'd been up to and what happened to him.
I shall prepare myself.
I recommend a stiff drink to help you through it. Is it also, like you said, you mentioned Witchfinder General there, who's infamous. Is it tempting to sort of bring other historical heroes of witchcraft into your books, or as people say, probably the most famous character in this country, certainly in the 20th century, was either Aleister Crowley or Helen Duncan. Is it tempting to kind of follow those characters? I mean, do you often get, as you say, you've got a very positive relationship with your readers. Have they kind of suggested historical figures they'd like to see included in your work?
No, they haven't actually. And as to whether I will do anything on Crowley, I don't know. He's quite infamous, isn't he? So he might, who knows, appear at one point. But no, they haven't actually suggested anyone yet. I tell you who does crop up in my Whitehaven Hunters series, and that's John Dee.
Ah, of course.
Yeah, Queen Elizabeth II, blimey, not her. Queen Elizabeth I magician.
Yes.
So he's obviously a fascinating character, and the Comte de Saint-Germain crops up, and people love putting him in fiction. So he's they're both in the Hunter series, but I say no more because there'd be spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah, so I do love to draw on historical characters, actually.
So, I mean, as you said, you've got your latest book is about to hit the shelves, figuratively, as we speak.
Yeah, it's out on my store first, and then it will be out on kind of Amazon, Kobo, and all the other retailers next week. So I always release a week earlier from my own shop, because last year I had the idea that I'd already had my own store. So it's a big thing for authors at the moment. Well, it has been for authors for a while, but it's gaining momentum to sell direct, which is basically when you have your own e-commerce and you have your own bookshop online. So I set mine up last year. I'd had a smaller one before, but I swapped it over, and it's a Shopify store, which backs a huge amount of internet businesses. So I set that up, I think it was September actually last year by the time it was finished. So yeah, I sell direct from there, and that's been fantastic. So I always sell earlier from there, and then it gets released a week later everywhere else. So yes, that's exciting. That's happening Wednesday. Yeah,
I suppose as well it increases that relationship you have with your devoted readership, Tracy, that by having these kind of facets to how you release things, that these people that sign up for your store, that follow your mailing list, to them it makes them feel even more special than just being a reader, because then they feel like they're part of a special gang, because they're getting it a week before everybody else who might like your book, but they don't like it as much as they do.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that as well. And you say it's lovely, because those who support my store, and I completely understand people who don't. You know, the people who are very wedded to their own retailers, and they're comfortable buying from them, and that's completely fine. But yes, it just means that, well, I earn more money for a start, because, I haven't got any of the other retailers taking their 30 or 40%. And it means I can do bundles. So it means I can actually offer discounts on bundles of 3 books or 6 books, or even the entire, 12 books. So they get better deals. I can offer a little bit better deals on paperbacks and hardbacks. And I offer merchandise, which is really fun thing to do because I love playing around with graphics and making merchandise. So that's the great thing about doing that. And I have a subscription service as well, by the way, on Ream, which is kind of a bit like Patreon.
Yes.
But it's specifically for authors. So that's called Happenstance Book Club. So in case your listeners are wondering why Happenstance Book Club, it's because Happenstance Books is the name of the shop, the bookshop that my character Avery Hamilton owns in Whitehaven Witches. So it made sense to name, I thought it would be a fun thing to do to call my shop that. And then my subscription service, Happenstance Book Club. So yes, again, it's somewhere, you know, that my fans can kind of subscribe to, and they get things earlier as well. And, you know, signed books and stuff which are sent out 3 or 4 times a year.
Brilliant. So what's next for you, Tracy? Like I say, you've got this new book coming out. You've got everything else going on with all your the facets of being a self-published author and everything that you're in charge of. Have you got ideas for a new series, or are you adding further volumes to your current series, or are you fancy just starting something completely from scratch and starting a whole new series based in this wonderful world that you've built up over the last few years?
Well, there's no new series yet, but I suppose the Moonfell Witches is my new series. I wrote a novella called The First Yule that was out at Christmas. It was a Christmas Yule, so that was a bit of an introduction to the new series. But the first book is out this week. I'm currently writing book 13 in the Whitehaven Witches series, which is called Sacred Magic. So that was going to be at the end of October, but I am running a little bit behind. So I've pushed it back. I haven't actually changed the release date yet, but it's going to be early December when that's out. And then I'll be doing the 3rd book in the Storm Moon Shifters series next year. And then I'll do another witch, another couple of books in both of my witch series. So that's my plans for next year. And then we'll see if I do end up doing a novella, or we'll see how next year rolls. But so my next 3 books, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, you say that, Tracy, it all depends. They might want you to write something else. You never know when your creative ego will take over you and guide your hands in strange directions.
I just say I finished the Whitehaven Hunter series, but it could well be that one of those characters, there is a few stories that can definitely be fleshed out from there. So potentially that will be another one of the books I'll do next year. I'm also quite excited because I've had a German translation done of the first book in my Whitehaven Witches series. Book 2 is being translated now. German is the next kind of biggest ebook market, really. So I've been intending to do that for a while, but it's kind of hard to find a translator. But I've got one now. So that book is going to be out hopefully in the next week or 2. So that's also on the cards. And I'm having more audiobooks narrated. So my narrator's working on, I think she's doing now book 10 in the Whitehaven Witches series.
Wow.
So this year I've been really full on tackling getting the backlist of my audiobooks up and running.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's always something. There's a few wheels spinning.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like there's not much you've not sort of grasped by the nettle and sort of gone, right, let's sort this out.
Maybe get myself the Whitehaven Witches on TV. That's my next project, maybe. That's a bold goal, isn't it?
Yeah. Watch this space then, Tracy. Watch this space.
That'd be fun.
Well, it's been absolutely lovely speaking with you, Tracy. Where can everybody find your blog, find your books, follow your work, join your mailing lists? Where can they find you and your witches?
Oh, well, wonderful. Thank you. My own bookstore, my online bookshop is called happenstancebookshop.com. So I sell all of my books on there, and audiobooks, paperbacks, hardbacks, and merchandise on there. My other author website is called tjgreenauthor.com, and that's where my blog is, although I do link it onto my Happenstance bookshop. So that's where you found the blog, and all my books are listed on there, and all the other wide retailer links are on there as well. So as I said, I sell on Amazon and Kobo and Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Nook, Apple. So Apple Books, I'm on iBooks and lots of other retailers. I'm on Facebook. TJ Green Author is my Facebook page. And I have a Facebook group called TJ's Inner Circle, which is really lovely little group where I run giveaways and it's just all kinds of, I have some lovely readers who hang out in there. So it's a really nice space to be. I'm on Instagram. So everywhere you'll find me, I'm TJ Green Author. So Instagram, as you say, I've got a YouTube channel. So all of my audiobooks are on there. All I ask is that you like and subscribe. So I get paid for all of those. So that was nice. Blimey, have I missed anywhere? I think I've covered most stuff. I'm on TikTok. So my other half, Jason, makes all my lovely, which does all my videos for TikTok and Instagram and things. So I'm on Pinterest, all the places.
Excellent. Well, I'll try and put as many links as I possibly can, Tracy, into the show notes so everybody can find you. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me, for giving us an insight to your world and your writing and the characters and some of your loves and passions. And I just want to say I wish you all the very best. I wish you the very best of luck for your continued success, and long may it continue. And I hope we speak again in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. You've been a wonderful interviewer. Thank you very much.